I will now call to order the Monday, February 27th, 2012 informational meeting of the Sioux Falls City Council. Welcome to all of you here in Carnegie Town Hall, those watching us on CityLink or at siouxfalls.org. We'll begin today's meeting with a staff report by Interim City Clerk Sue Roust. Sue?
Thank you, Madam Chair. Just to give you a brief update on the legislative session, it is just about done, and I'll give you a little more detailed follow-through next week. But tomorrow is the last day for bills to pass both houses, and so we're very close to the end. As to bills that are of interest to the Council and were on your legislative priority list, Senate Bill 174 on the 911 fee, raising it to $1.25, passed the House today. There is a minor adjustment, so it is going to have to go to conference committee, but it appears to me it's a pretty minor amendment. Hopefully the two houses will agree on it and that will be passed. That would be a great step forward in helping us plan for future updates and enhancements to the 911 system. Senate Bill 99, which is the one about trying to put some control over liquor licensees who sell to minors, is still out there. It is at a conference committee now. There was a minor, looks to me like a minor change in the second house, but it is not quite there. It's, in some ways, this will not give us real teeth, but it's a start toward emphasizing the importance that this city and other cities place on concerns about sales to underage folks. And then, of course, Senate Bill 58 on the voting centers, that passed last week while we were in informational. It's been signed by the governor now. I would also just mention it's full speed ahead on the election. The filing deadline was last Friday. We have 10 candidates for 4 council positions. We will hold the drawing for the order on the ballot tomorrow at 11 a.m. And by next week we will be printing ballots. Our target date to start absentee voting is March 12th.
Any questions for Ms. Roust? Thank you, Sue. City Council open discussion. Any items? Councilor Erpenbach.
I have a couple of things, Madam Chair, if I could. One, and I apologize, I'm struggling with the wireless in this building right now. If IT is listening, help me out. But Project NICE and Project KEEP, our health department and various departments come together and do some things in different neighborhoods in terms of, hauling away trash and wrecked cars, and I don't know, all kinds of stuff happens with that. And it's been going on for 20-plus years now in Sioux Falls. I had no idea it was that long. But you and I, Councilor Aguilar, have talked about the possibility of council members volunteering, and I know Councilor Brown has done that in the past, I think, or helped with the Whittier thing or whatever.
Actually, Councilor Knutson and I have some great stories about helping out on those things.
So we just kind of wanted to toss that out to our colleagues, that perhaps that would be an interesting thing for us to do. My neighborhood is part of the Project NICE, which is that first phase. There are 2 portions of the city that are covered by Project NICE this year, and then a third portion is Project KEEP, which is kind of a revisiting one that was done previously. So it's that middle week in April. I think it's April 16th through the 20th. I apologize again, I don't have my notes coming up electronically yet, but there is, I'm getting a nod, so it is April 16th through the 20th. There is a volunteer meeting prior to that. I believe that's April 10th to get kind of your marching orders, and so if council is interested in doing that, put on your jeans and your work clothes, and it might be a fun thing to do just to kind of get out and participate in the community. So that's my one thing. I do have one other, but Councilor Anderson.
When you're done.
Okay. My other one then is, I'm not on the ballot this year, but I have been encouraged by friends and neighbors to have a listening session for the Central District, and it is this Saturday at 9 o'clock at the main library downtown, and Channel 16 CityLink will be there, and so I have no idea what to expect, but I am bringing cookies. You'll have to bring your own coffee because I make terrible coffee, but come and hang out. We'll talk about Central District issues and whatever's on people's minds, so you're all invited to join me. Thank you.
Thank you, Councilor Erpenbach. Councilor Anderson.
I was going to say, would it be open in our schedule to have a brief update on Project NICE and KEEP so that we could show the areas that are going to be affected, and we might get more volunteers that way also?
Yeah, we'll look into scheduling a short presentation on that. Any other? Councilor Brown?
Just two things. I recall a story from Project Nice or Project Keep with Councilor Knutson and I carrying old microwaves and appliances, and it was a fun experience. The other thing I wanted to remind the council of is that tonight at 7 o'clock, the All Saints neighborhood is having another meeting at the History Club on Phillips Avenue. So if anyone has interest in that, that is going on this evening.
Thank you. Councilor Rolfing?
I'm wondering if we could impose on Councilor Urbanbach to forward us that information for the 10th, where it's going to be and that sort of thing.
Yeah, I will do that. I'm actually getting online now, so I'll send that to your address.
Would
in just a few
appreciate it.
minutes.
Thank
And it will be eventually on siouxfalls.org. I did look for it today, and it's not
Okay.
up yet,
I
but
hadn't
it will
seen
be.
anything
So,
yet,
yeah,
so,
it's
yeah.
coming.
I was wondering if it was just going to you or what.
I don't believe so.
Okay.
Any other council open discussion? If not, we'll go on to today's presentation, Railroad Relocation Project Update. And I think we'll begin with Director Mark Cotter. Welcome, Director Cotter.
Thank you, Madam Chair and City Council members. I'm Mark Cotter with the Office of Public Works. And tonight's presentation to you is to give you an intent on what our public meetings will be tonight at the Orpheum from 6 to 8, and then tomorrow night in Brandon from 6 to 8. They are both mirror images of each other, and our intent is to go through the history of the project, also traverse through what the multi-phase plan is, and then we really will focus on what we commonly call Phase 2 and Phase 3. I will start, though, to provide you a broad overview of how rail service operates in our area and how the Railroad Relocation Plan really does look forward to the growth of the city as well as eastern South Dakota. Let me assure you that no decisions have been made. We're going through an environmental process, and that we certainly have valued the input that we've received from the community at large, the park board, the park users, the downtown Sioux Falls, residents and businesses in northeast Sioux Falls regarding the rail yard, the city of Brandon and its residents regarding the rail yard, and the residents on the south end of the city where a siding is being considered. Next slide, please. Before we dive into the specific project, let me orientate you to how the rail lines bisect the city of Sioux Falls. The white area is the city of Sioux Falls, and you can see the light blue is the Big Sioux River as it comes into town and sweeps to the south and moves to the north. I'll have Josh Peterson, our project manager, just trace. Essentially, Burlington Northern has three main subdivisions that create a Y in our city. Starting with the Madison subdivision, this line starts at Madison and traverses to the center of our city. The Corson subdivision starts at the center of the city and then moves out toward Corson. And this moves on eventually into the Minnesota area. And then moving to the south from the center of the city, there's the siding, there's the Canton subdivision. So often we'll talk about the names of those subdivisions. So if you orientate yourself with where Sioux Falls is at, and then its proximity to a Madison subdivision, the Corson subdivision, and the Canton subdivision. We also have two local rail yard companies, and they are Ellis and Eastern. That is a subsidiary of Concrete Materials. They have a track that starts on the west end of the city. Josh. And then moves through and then moves out to the east side of the city. We also have one that starts at the north, and it's called the Dakota and Iowa line, and that is owned by the Everest Company, and that starts at Del Rapids and moves through our city as well. Next slide. Let me share with you the history of this project. Back in 2002, there were two key studies wrote. One was a benefit study, and there was a railroad relocation study that looked at the feasible options of how a rail yard and facilities owned by Burlington Northern Santa Fe could be removed from the downtown area. When the rail yard was Constructed over 100 years ago, our industrial area was in the core of our city. This is no longer the case. The core of our city is truly being transformed. And in addition to this change, trains today are much longer than they were 100 years ago. And the benefits on both sides to do this project are key. Again, the multi-phase plan written in 2002 regarding the benefits and the feasibility is broke down into 4 phases. As we'll talk about tonight, we will just share with you that this is allowed for the brownfield redevelopment that is today called West Falls Park, and then other key large transportation projects, Benson Road Extension and South Dakota 100, are always in mind as we're looking at this project. Next slide. Phase 1 of the plan was completed in 2004 and included the elimination of the Milwaukee Yard and the removal of the core line. There's some pictures here that show the results of these projects. First, the Benson Road siding, and the next slide we'll show you in a moment, was replaced. There was already a rail yard that in the same location where Phillips to the Falls is today. There was a rail yard in that area that was removed when the sidings up by the airport were constructed. This also provided for the extension of Phillips Avenue and also the expanded use of Falls Park West. And then if you use the Pasley Park underpass for a park or for ball in the summer, that at-grade crossing was removed and an underpass was built as a part of Phase 1. Next slide. This is the slide. This is the before and after slide of where the Milwaukee Yard was along with the core line and then the resulting after. The core line started just off the top of the map near North Drive, and then that traversed all the way through that area, that long, and went down to the 11th Street viaducts. So Josh, can you draw that? So from the top, that's what they commonly called the core line. And then where you see the series of tracks north of 6th Street up to the top of the map, that's where they called the Milwaukee Yard. So there's already been one rail yard removed from the downtown, and that was replaced again with the siding up north. This has only happened within the last 8 years, but just in recent conversations, many people don't remember the use of this rail yard because now they, on the right side, enjoy the extension of Falls Park West, the new road that takes you straight from the downtown into the flagship park of Falls Park, and then also opens up the opportunity for economic development of Uptown. Last point we want to show is between 6th and 8th Street last year. The railroad bridge as a part of the River Greenway was removed and a new pedestrian bridge was put in place to expand the use of our bike trail system. So again, all these elements go into this multi-phased approach to help us interface with the rail. Next slide. Phase 2 and Phase 3 will be the primary discussion point tonight, and Phase 2 consists of removing the existing rail yard from the downtown that BNSF currently owns and operates and moves it to an area in the northeast quadrant of Sioux Falls. Phase 3 includes constructing the necessary connections in the downtown or other facilities to help facilitate the movement of trains from the Madison subdivision to the Corson subdivision. There'll be much more discussion about this. Next slide. Phase 4 consists of constructing separated grade crossings at key intersections in our city to, again, as our traffic grows, as our landmass gets developed, that we can continue to grow as a city, but also have efficient rail service. Here's two of the most recent overpasses that have been built. 57th Street that provides unimpeded flow of traffic for about 12,000 vehicles per day. And the 69th Street overpass was just finished last year as we move south and opens up growth and development to the south. The two that are called out in orange, they're in the study as well for us to look at as key streets that move traffic but also interface with the rail. We just signed a notice to proceed with the DOT to study the entire 26th Street corridor from Cliff Avenue to Cleveland, and evaluating a separated grade crossing at that intersection for the rail will be considered in that study as well as 12th Street on Cliff Avenue. Phase 1 and parts of Phase 4 are complete. In 2005, Congress authorized $40 million in grant funding to complete Phase 2 and Phase 3. The use of federal funds requires the city to use the National Environmental Policy Act of 1969 that essentially requires you to look at the environmental impacts of projects and also weigh them and solicit public feedback. And so that's essentially the process that we're going through. We call that NEPA for short, and both are a very good process as you evaluate alternatives and seek input on the final objective. Federal Highway Administration is the authority on this project. Our connection to Federal Highway is the South Dakota Department of Transportation. Both have been very active partners in this project. And we will study the details and the alternatives using the NEPA guidelines to develop the ultimate preferred alternatives. Next slide. Let's talk just in brief about what it means on Phase 2 and Phase 3. Moving a rail yard from the downtown to a different location, since it's concentrated facility, is somewhat straightforward to comprehend. But there's been questions about why is a bridge being considered over the Falls Park with that plan? Why is there a south siding south of the city being considered for that plan? And essentially, one of the key things that we have to address and answer is, as trains come today from Madison, they come downtown into that rail switch yard. That's how they interact in their rail yard. Now, if the rail yard is moved to the northeast corner of the city, we have to find a way to get those trains that are coming and going from Madison to the new rail yard. So the bridge across the Upper Falls would allow for a continuous movement from Madison across that bridge out to the new rail yard, and the same in return as that would occur. Congress has laws in place that protect parkland, and if there are other feasible alternatives, you have to consider them and evaluate them to protect parkland. And so the other way to another potential way to make that movement from the Madison sub over to the Corson sub is you essentially bring those trains into town, bring them down south, bring them into a siding, and then now you can imagine that the power is on the south end of that train. It gets moved around to the north end of the train and then essentially gets pulled out to Corson. We are continuing to work with Burlington Northern to see if there are other feasible alternatives that can still accomplish that movement efficiently, and we are evaluating one that would essentially potentially allow that movement to occur in the downtown, to allow to move that power around and out. We'll have very limited information on that tonight, just because that alternative is just starting to be addressed. But again, tonight's intent is to really bring people up to speed on the project, get their current feedback, and then we'll be back in front of them. Again, we have a large project team on this project, and we want to get you in front of them. Next slide. All right, for the project steering committee, it's made up of the City of Sioux Falls. We've hired Alfred Benish Company as our consultant to perform the environmental assessment process. We have the South Dakota Department of Transportation with us this evening. Michael Beam is with us from the DOT. The BNSF Railroad, Sarud Daru is with us. Federal Highway Administration tonight, Marion Barber. And with Ellison Eastern was not able to attend, and we also have two citizens on our steering committee. And so without any further ado, let me bring up Mike Gorham. He's with Alfred Benish Company, and he'll take you through the remainder of our presentation. Thank you.
Well, thank you, Mark. I am Mike Gorman. I'm with Alfred Benish and Company. I've had the pleasure of being on this project from the very beginning, and it has had its difficulties, but I really feel like we've made some significant progress in the last few months, and looking forward to completion of the project with the schedule that we put together. Overall, when Mark mentioned this, you know, the purpose of the project is to provide for economic development in the downtown. Taking out the existing rail yard provides acres of potential development that can be of higher use than what exists there today. And as Mark also mentioned, the existing yard was built for a different type of train than exists today. The other thing that we had to keep in mind as we've worked on this project is we have to maintain rail operations. We can't come up with an alternative that isn't suitable for the BN. So again, as Mark mentioned, we're conducting an environmental assessment. That assessment will review the impacts of each of the alternatives and enable us to use federal funds. We know that the benefits of the project is going to be reduced delay on 6th and 8th Street. It's going to be improved safety at the crossings, and again, additional acres allowed for economic development. The project was actually started in 2006 when a federal earmark was obtained. We began the environmental assessment in July of 2006 when we had the first public meeting. We've had 2 other public meetings since then. In October of 2008, we submitted a draft environmental assessment. That was reviewed by the South Dakota DOT and the Federal Highway Administration and found to be needing additional work in terms of looking at additional alternatives and doing more in-depth study of the alternatives that we'd already looked at. So there was quite a bit of time working with the DOT and Federal Highway Administration to come up with a scope of work that could get us from today to the finish line. We commenced work in February of 2011, almost exactly a year ago, and in that time we've been working, I'd say, arm in arm with the BN to come up with alternatives that they can live with and that are environmentally acceptable. Tonight is our 4th public meeting. We expect to submit our draft EA in June of this year and have the 5th public meeting potentially in September. Depending upon how our meetings go today and the input that we get and whatever concern that we might learn about, we may have additional public meetings between now and September to clear up any questions people have. We expect to complete the environmental assessment by December of this year and begin design at the beginning of 2013 for construction to occur 2013-2014. So that's the schedule as it exists today. As Mark mentioned, there's 3 lines that come into Sioux Falls: the Madison sub from the northwest, the Corson sub from the northeast, and the Canton sub from the south. Those make up the trains and take apart the trains in the yard that currently exists, and it works today. If we move the yard to northeast of the city, we need to provide for an acceptable movement of train traffic from the Madison sub to the Corson sub. And I just want to go over the different alternatives that we have to accomplish that movement. What you're seeing on your screens right now is a very, very simplistic drawing, and it's really just to get the point across on these key movements that we must accommodate. One alternative is the one that results in building a new bridge over the falls, and it's shown in red in the drawing. You can see where the new rail yard is off to the right. Indicated on the left on the Madison sub is a train coming south. The orange circle is the engine. The blue circles are the rail cars. And I just want to show the actual movement over to the course and sub. Again, very simplistic, but without that Y bridge, there is no easy way to make that movement. Now, another alternative that we have to make that movement is the construction of a new siding. We've looked at one down south of 57th Street. There's a potential that we could potentially build one closer to the downtown. That's being investigated. And there's a third alternative, too, that I want to make the council aware of. But in this alternative, the movement is from the Madison to the Canton and then out to the rail yard. But the first thing that has to happen, as Mark mentioned, is the engine always needs to be pulling the rail cars. If the engine is pushing the rail cars, then somebody has to be on the back, that's a railroad employee, watching to make sure that the crossings are safe as they progress. And that's an expense to the railroads. So here's the action that occurs with the new siding. The train comes south, goes onto the siding, the engine is detached, goes back north, comes back to the siding, to the front, and then pulls the rail cars out to the course and sub. That's the way that they're continuously pulling. So that's another alternative and the reason why a siding may be necessary. In this case, the siding would only be used for that movement. That movement occurs once per week, according to the BN. That's how often that would occur. But they're saying that their operations may in the future result in a twice per week operation. So they're indicating that may happen. Okay, the next alternative is to do the switch of the engine on the Madison sub in the new siding track that was constructed as part of an earlier project. So you come to the south, you do that runaround, if you will, with the engine, put it on the back of the rail cars, and at that point, go ahead, you push it for a short distance, just get south of the rail yard, and then pull it out to the new yard. So that's another alternative that we're examining with the BN that would allow us to do this movement without constructing a new siding. The primary alternatives that we're studying with this project, there's actually two major ones. One is to build the new yard on the course and sub. And then there's three alternatives that we're looking at with that. There's two with the Rice Street Timberline Road option and one with the E&E Railroad option. The second major component is to remove the tracks from the downtown, and that requires either constructing a new Y bridge at the falls, constructing a south siding, or transfer from the Madison sub to the Corson sub south of the existing yard. And that one, again, is one that we are working with. And I also want to stress that the no build is always with us. You know, if for whatever reason we come to a point we can't build or find an alternatives that's reasonable and feasible, fitting within our environmental guidelines, and that the BN can live with, we may end up doing nothing. Well, here's to begin to look at the other yard locations. We studied 12 different sites along the Corson sub to find one that would be suitable. The sites started about 4 miles where we are looking at alternatives today, out 17.5 miles. And for various reasons, we had to rule out the other locations. They didn't have a long enough tangent. At least 7,000 feet is necessary. It was getting involved in wetlands. It had impacts to existing homes and property, or for a variety of reasons, those were eliminated. You know, another issue was the further you get out from the downtown, the more it costs the BN to operate that railroad. And remember, they're partners in all of this, and we needed to consider railroad operations as well. So we did end up with the site that's about 4 miles out. It's at the intersection of Rice and Timberline. As I mentioned, there's two alternatives we're looking at here. One is building the new yard on the northwest of the existing main line. This one has gone through quite a bit of work with the BN, and it looks like this is an alternative that's acceptable. One major feature of this is the Timberline Avenue relocation. We cannot put Timberline through the yard and have it connect to Rice. With those multiple locations and everything, that's too big a disruption for the BN, and it also is too big of a safety concern for the vehicles. So we have created a relocation of Timberline to connect with Rice just to the south of the proposed new rail yard. There's other issues involved with this in terms of utilities and that we are considering as part of our evaluation process. The next alternative is also at the same location, but the yard is built to the south and the east. That creates some issues because it ends up having to move parts of Rice Street, and parts of Rice Street then end up in Great Bear recreational area. And any taking of park property is a major concern and consideration in the environmental process. It also takes out much more of the overhead utilities that are out there, and there are other impacts to consider as well. So of the two on the study area, the first one that I showed you appears to be the most feasible. We also looked, because of the impacts to Timberline Road, we also looked at this potential site at what we're calling E&E, and it's off the E&E main line. It would use portions of the E&E track to get to it, and would have less impacts in terms of road relocations. The problem with this site is potentially its proximity to the residential area to the south, and there's some additional costs with the additional track and things that are attributed to this alternative. Next slide. We are doing an evaluation of all of the yard alternatives. I'm showing you here what I call kind of a consumer's reports indication of how the various alternatives compare with the environmental criteria that's shown along the left. And I won't go through each of that with you tonight, but we have numbers for each one of those impacts as well that we make available to you. The other major part of this, as I mentioned before, is the removal of the tracks downtown, and that's shown by all of the black track that you see in the drawings above. The first alternative in study area 2 was alternative A. This went south as far as we possibly could with the crossing of the Big Sioux. And the big negative on that is it goes right through Sioux Steel, and significant impact, significant cost to build this. That's just a little blow up of the yellow there, where the bridge would be, relocated walkways underneath the bridges and roadways, and just again a very simplified drawing of what would be required. The next one is study area 2, alternative B. This one, we tried to keep the existing track over the park in place, or a bridge, and then we added a new one that just handled the Madison to Corsom movement. Go ahead. Here's a close-up of that. The additional red line you see is a track that's used to get to John Morrell. And then finally, we had alternative C, which was kind of a compromise of the two. It's how do we get south far enough not to significantly impact Sioux Steel, but still handle train operations. Go ahead. And it requires 2 bridges, elimination of the existing bridge, and accommodating traffic movements that way. Okay, we talked about the Y Bridge as being one way to get from the Madison to the Corson. We also talked about the south siding. Here we're studying 2 sites. Alternative B goes from 69th down to County Highway 106. They need approximately 8,300 feet for the siding, and a mile is about 5,300 feet, just for your reference. The next one goes from 57th to 85th location. It does have some issues regarding a proposed park, potential wetland area that we're studying as part of our evaluation. If we do put the south siding in, there could be some mitigation measures that we would put along with the siding that would include a barrier wall of some type that would be right adjacent to the BNSF rail right-of-way. We're just showing the second set of tracks there. At this point in our process, we don't know if the siding would be closer to the houses, it would be on the other side. We don't know how tall the wall would be. We don't know exactly where an auxiliary road would be that would serve that. We're just in the middle of discussions with BN to work out those details. And it's really a perfect time to have this meeting with you and the public to get their thoughts about that so that we can have that information when we're working with the BN. Again, a summary of impacts will be conducted and reviewed for each of the alternatives, all of the major areas that are considered in the environmental assessment. And finally, just another review of the schedule and where we are today. Tonight we're having the fourth public meeting. Tomorrow we're meeting in Brandon. And we will be having another public meeting no later than September of this year, wrapping up the study, we hope, in December of this year. We've come up with a number of ways for the public to participate and get involved in this project. We want to hear from the public, get their input. Tonight we're going to have comment forms. We're going to have sign-in sheets for folks that attend the meeting. We are going to have project representatives there to talk to people, anybody that has questions. And we have a website where people can get on at any time and get information about the project or ask questions. With that, I'll open it up to any questions. Yeah.
Councilor Chair, before we go to questions, one of the things that you'd asked was for community development to do a presentation on if the rails were removed from downtown, what does that look like? And Erica Beck is here to address those questions. Erica?
Good afternoon, Erica Beck with the Community Development Office. Thank you for having me today. I just want to give you a brief presentation in regards to some of the economic development impacts that this project has already had on downtown Sioux Falls and the community overall, and then where we are going from here in terms of Phase 2 and Phase 3 and the remainder of the rail switchyard being relocated out of the downtown area. Just as a reminder, the first project that I want to talk about is Phase 1 of this overall rail relocation project. As Mark had indicated, this project started in 2001 and 2002 with the actual rail relocation master plan. And within that rail relocation master plan, three primary benefits were identified, including the project's overall impact on providing opportunities for economic development. As you can see above you, Mark indicated also that part of that Phase 1 that was completed was we call it the Phillips Avenue extension, which removed that core rail line out of downtown, which was known as the Milwaukee Yard. This is actually, next slide, Josh. This was actually a before picture of what the downtown area looked like with that rail still existent in the downtown. And hopefully you can see from this picture, because I think it does provide a good visual of what our downtown looked like, that not only did we have rail on the east bank within downtown, but we also had a major switch yard on the west bank of downtown as well. So if you can imagine being actually an employee of Raven Industries at that time, you were on an island if you tried to get out, and there were train tracks on both the east and the west side of the downtown area. And so what I wanted to talk just about a little bit was how this Phase 1 portion of the project has actually changed our community. The next slide shows an after image. This is from 2011 of what our downtown looks like. And as you can see, that portion of where that Milwaukee switchyard used to be located is significantly different. For one, it's green, right? Since 2001, since we've been working on that 10 years ago, our downtown has become stronger and stronger. Our commitment thus far to the railroad relocation plan and project has provided the private sector alone with the justification and support to move forward and complete over $100 million in development adjacent to and on that phase one portion of the railroad relocation project. $100 million in development alone, that does not include additional opportunities and benefits that have been created through business expansion, job growth, and increases in sales and property tax revenues. Phase one of the railroad relocation project also provided the city with an opportunity to leverage and obtain federal funding for the cleanup of the former salvage yard, which used to be in Falls Park West, and that has led to additional enhanced recreational and tourism opportunities and even event opportunities for Sioux Falls and the entire region. Next slide, Josh. This is just a before and after again of what that looks like. I think sometimes pictures do say 1,000 words, and hopefully you'll get that from this image as well, because I think sometimes, and even both myself and others in our office forget that this is actually what has transformed downtown to what it is today thus far. Next slide. I spoke just briefly a little bit earlier about the $100 million in development resulting from phase one. That includes both renovation and new construction that has taken place or that is in progress and expected to be complete within the next year and a half. The highlighted area on this map illustrates those areas that I utilized for this calculation. If you take another look at this, and again at some of the images that Mark and Josh showed you earlier, you can truly see how phase one impacted the downtown area. For example, the C&A building, it feasibly would not have been able to be constructed if the rail line was still there. So you can see what an impact that has had on our downtown and our community overall, solely based on phase one being completed. $100 million in development, what does that mean? As I had indicated before, that is in reference to the projects associated with the areas in blue above, but that totals about $75 million in assessed valuation. That's what property taxes are based from. This is compared to an assessed valuation in 2001 of the same property, totaling roughly $10.7 million. This is an increase of approximately $65 million in assessed valuation, or just over $11 million in taxes being paid out to the city, county, and school districts. That's what that $100 million meant to us and all the taxing entities within Sioux Falls. So we wanted to talk a little bit about future opportunities with regard to phase two and phase three. 13 acres of property will be available for redevelopment if phases 2 and 3 of the rail relocation project are completed. 13 acres is represented roughly by that image on the left within the blue dotted lines. Several years ago, when we were considering possibilities for this property, a group of community stakeholders provided commentary that led to the conceptual site plan that's depicted on the right. This represents only a portion of that redevelopment potential that would be available with the relocation of the switchyard. Not only does the land lend itself well to the potential development of modern urban facilities, including housing, commercial, and office space, it will also provide support for additional development adjacent to it through the incorporation of both public and private parking opportunities. Additional thought and preparation is warranted in determining the potential of this area with respect especially to the portion of the redevelopment property that exists between 8th Street and 10th Street. And that's all going to be sought out by different stakeholder groups through our update to our downtown redevelopment plan. Next steps for us is that we will be working alongside Public Works and the city planning staff in updating the economic impact study that was completed in 2002 as part of this original project. And our intent is to have those results prepared and ready to be presented along with the environmental assessment sent forward by the Benesch Company. The results of that study will be presented to the City Council and the public when they are complete. If you have any questions, I would be more than happy to answer them. We have a lot of economic development partners of our department and of the city in the audience as well in support of this project, as is Mike Cooper, who assisted in putting this information together.
Thank you, Erica. We now will take questions of Mark, Mike, or Erica. Councilor Jameson.
Well, first off, thanks for coming. This is a very tough topic for all of us to probably digest and to make decisions about in the future. The 13 acres of land that would be freed up and then potentially sold, who owns that land and who would be in charge of selling it to these developers or would-be prospect developers?
Well,
Would that be the city?
Well, currently, BNSF owns the land, and about half of the land in the downtown, the Ellison Eastern Rail Yard Rail Company, has the first right of refusal. So one of the key elements for the Federal Highway Administration as well as the DOT is that in addition to the environmental assessment study, that we also draft a memorandum of understanding that will go in when the environmental assessment document is submitted, that basically lays out the guidelines of how the land would be exchanged, because the city would first have to go out and purchase the land where the new rail yard would go, and then construct the improvements. And then the intent is right now to have a functional replacement. So essentially exchanging one yard for the other. But again, and we've made significant strides in that MOU in the last month, and we're going to continue to work that as hard as the environmental assessment.
Councilor?
In this whole discussion, I think there's a couple things for me, but for right now, I guess the first issue is the money. I mean, the $36 million that's left, is that going to be enough to cover moving these lines, purchasing that new land, reselling this 13 acres back to somebody else without the use of TIFs, because that's going to be asked. If anybody's going to do anything down there, we're going to want a TIF, and all of a sudden then we've lost all that. Have you guys penciled all that through to see if this is even realistic? Because I'm hearing a lot of pushback from people that this is a whole lot of talk about something that is never going to happen.
Well, in a sense, the rail yard is, we have a slide that shows some of those preliminary costs. The rail yard...
Could you go back to that? Because
Sure.
it was hard to see on
Sure.
our map.
It's alternative A6. Just please bear with me.
I think it was just 3 from the end.
Okay, can you circle that number? So right now, the expected cost, and Mike Gorham's here with the engineering firm, the expected cost is $33 million. Right now, we expect the congressional ad is at about $36 million, $35 to $36 million. And so the construction of the new rail yard would take the majority of the current funding. Now, the key then becomes, what's the alternative that's done in the downtown? If it's a Y bridge, we've seen what those costs are because those are on other slides. That's a significant cost. And what the siding costs are also laid out. So I think the key will be is we want to make sure that we make a good long-term decision for the operation of how our city grows and how trains interface with our community. But certainly if a couple options are selected that require more infrastructure, above the yard will be above what we currently have for funding.
Just to follow up on that, because I think it is the biggest issue. In essence, the city would pay for that. The city would need to pay for that. $15, $20 million, right? Roughly could be the difference.
Again, if an alternative to this, if a certain alternative for Phase 3 was selected that takes us significantly over our current funding, then we would have to devise a funding plan. And today I wouldn't say that it would be 100% in the city's cost, but I think that, we would certainly have to address a funding plan.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Councilor Intiman.
Mark, I just want to clarify a couple of things here, too. I'm concerned about the dollars this is going to cost, too, as is just like Councilor Jameson. A comment was made that the environmental assessment part of this program actually started in 2006, correct?
Correct.
So the holdup on this whole thing really isn't the city. The holdup in this whole process has been the Fed. Is that correct?
Well, the Federal Highway Administration's on our project team, so I certainly don't want to direct anything to there. They are in a position to, and Marion's here, she can speak to the NEPA process, but there is a guided process that you go through to evaluate alternatives and ultimately select those alternatives.
And the reason I'm asking the question is that there's been some hints that the holdback and the whole development of this project, this whole process has been the city's fault, and it's holding on the city, when in fact we're not controlling the funds, we're not necessarily controlling the process because that's dictated by DOT and by the Federal Highway Administration. That's what I'm hearing here, is where part of this process has been, and the delay in this is this environmental process that we've been going through since 2006.
It's correct that an environmental process takes an extended period of time, especially when you're doing something as unique as removing a rail yard. It's not as straightforward that I would say 95% of the environmental assessments that are done in the state of South Dakota are either to expand a road, something very straightforward. This is unique, and it's certainly taken a lot of due diligence.
I do commend the foresight that the former city council and the administration and the mayor had in bringing the projects to this point of where we're at now. It's been absolutely fantastic, and as a lifelong citizen of Sioux Falls, I really do appreciate it. I know there's challenges as we go forward, and what's been brought to my attention recently is that as we develop our downtown area and the need for the TIFs, because what we have found out with current development that's taking place, as well as some proposed development here in the near future, is that our forefathers were not very good stewards of our environment out there, and that there's a lot of things that exist in the ground that we have absolutely no idea what's down there. And it would seem to me, and knowing a little bit the history in dealing with railroads, that this is also could be a very strong possibility when we start looking at the development of the existing yards that are there, or the tracks that we have to remove, that we could run into some of the same kinds of environmental issues that we're coming up with now. Has any boring samples or any work been done on any of the existing rail property downtown?
Yes, there has been extensive borings done, and that was one of the things that the Federal Highway Administration and the South Dakota DOT asked us to do that was not in the original scope of work. We did what's called a Phase 1, which is basically an observation of the site and looking at various things that would tell you that there could be a problem underground, and then we did a Phase 2, and we did a number of borings and tested the soil and things. The good news is, from what we found, there are no hidden, real significant problems as a result of the work that we've done.
Other questions? Councilor Rolfing.
I have a couple things. If you would go to your fancy little deal where you had the trains running. I just got done spending a week with my grandsons, and they would have loved that. It appears to me that if you run the one that where we do the sighting, you're still pulling the train instead of, or you're pushing, not pushing, you're pulling backwards with the engine up to Corson, right?
Now, which one are you? The one with the siding, or
Right,
this one?
do the one with the siding.
Okay.
And you're going to go down, you're going to go all the way down,
Yep, watch it, yeah, it's pulling.
yeah, and then you're going to
Detach.
detach, and you're going to come back,
Yeah.
and now you're going to back the engine all the way to Corson.
Oh, really, the engines go both ways.
Both ways.
Without any issue.
Without any
And
issue.
there's a front windshield on both sides.
Okay.
So that the person
Not a
can see.
problem. Do the one that you did, the number 3, alternate
Okay.
3.
Yep, let me caution you all that this is not one that the BN is that interested in. You know, it's one that we're working with, and it would require some pushing, as we've discussed, is a thing that they don't want because that requires the additional employee and the additional cost.
Oh, this one would still,
Yes.
still take the additional, because even though it's a short distance?
Correct.
Okay, okay, I was just looking at this saying, hey, this doesn't look like,
Because they like to have the engineer's eyes.
But, yeah, the engineer needs
no,
to be able to-
this wouldn't be any, oh, ice?
Okay, here's what happens with this one. Let's start from the beginning.
Yeah.
Is prior to this movement, and we didn't get it on this this animation, you do the runaround like you would with a siding, and you put the engine in the back of the train, and then you push it to south of the Y,
There you go,
and then
okay.
you pull it out to the Corson sub. It's that
Now I
movement
see.
of pushing that is the BN objects to, and may make it difficult to move forward with that
Got
alternative.
it, okay. The other thing that I looked at, if you could put up the map of the city, about one before all of this, yeah, there. When I look at this, and, you know, my brain sometimes isn't logical. But this one, when I look at this, how logical does it, what kind of logic would be to run that line coming in from Madison right along the north side of Interstate 90 or the south side of Interstate 90 and come over there?
You mean relocate the whole line?
That part of the line that comes in from that right from there and go right across there to the new siding over on over by where you're projecting it to be and have that done, because there's literally nothing over there.
I could tell you that it could be a much bigger environmental issue than what we're talking about today, just because you're on new alignment where there aren't trains today, and the impacts to property would be extremely high. Property would be cut off. You know, it's not very easy to cross a track. In fact, I think the BN would probably tell you there'd be no at-grade crossings. They're trying to get rid of those as much as possible. So
Okay.
I think the magnitude of that project would dwarf what we're talking about
Okay,
tonight.
that's what I want to know.
Yep.
That's what I want to know.
Counselor Brown.
I have actually a question for Erica. Okay. Erica, it's likely a question you can't answer, but I understand the concerns about the immediate impact of what the costs would be for the infrastructure. You told us that a $100 million redevelopment happened because of Phase 1. When will that study be done on what, how soon will we see the dollar impact if Phase 2 and 3 happened for downtown redevelopment?
Yeah, our intent is to have that done, completed within the next month.
So very soon. Do you have any indication at this point of if it's going to be larger than what the impact of $100 million was on Phase 1 or smaller than that? Any indication at this point?
I really don't, but what I would say is that $100 million that I referred to, that was made up of both renovation, a large majority of that was renovation, and then some new construction projects that happened as a result of that initial Phase 1 relocation. The other thing that I'll just throw out to kind of give you a perspective on what that $100 million means is that the new CNA building, for instance, that development cost is roughly $24 million. So when we're talking about putting those types of things into perspective, yes, we utilize tax increment financing and other incentives within our downtown area, but we also reap a lot of benefits from doing that, because if not but for those types of incentives, a lot of these projects would not happen. And if not for Phase 1 of this railroad relocation project, none of these projects would have happened, period. They wouldn't have happened because there would have been a train running right through the property. So I just want to emphasize that a little bit more because it is really important to our entire community. We've seen a lot of really good things happen as a result of Phase 1.
Thanks, Erica.
Counselor Karski.
My question regards the environmental assessment. Whoever wants to take it, I guess, but does that assessment put any weight or study into any operating efficiencies, anything that the railroad gains as far as economic impact, larger size, larger capacity, et cetera?
The only consideration that we have there is that the railroad be able to run a viable operation. We don't look at it to determine whether there's a betterment for the railroad after this or not. It's just what does it take to replicate as best as possible the operations that they have that are occurring in the downtown right now.
So we're not concerned, we're concerned about where we are, not what the next 150 years are going to look like as far as what doing this will do for us in our community?
Oh, I think we're very much concerned about that, and I think the moves that we're making with getting that rail yard out of the downtown and to the northeast modernizes the whole situation, and I think that that's, you know, a great step forward as far as that goes. What it does for the railroad for the next 100 or 150 years, I don't think that's as big a concern of ours as we go forward with the EA. We just want to leave them whole, just leave them in a situation where they're no better or no worse than they are today.
Okay.
Counselor Erpenbach.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Erica, can I ask you to come up again, please? One of the complaints that I've heard as the Central District representative on the council is that it's only 13 acres. What is the big deal? Can you give us kind of put it into perspective for us? What does that 13 acres mean? I know that you showed us a graph and all of that, but give me some words. What could we put into that 13 acres?
I'll give you a visual, and this is an after the meeting exercise for anybody to do. But drive across the 10th Street Viaduct, and if you have the opportunity to park and then walk up on the viaduct and look north, all of those railroad tracks right next to the 8th and Railroad Center, all of that land is available if this project is completed. The properties that I showed you highlighted within those blue areas, that was roughly equal to 25 acres. If you can think of additional development taking place adjacent to the 8th and Railroad Center, adjacent to the existing Sharapa Place, those are all things that have been talked about already as part of this larger vision for our community and for this larger vision for our downtown. So we're talking about a lot of different opportunities. I talked about mixed-use buildings that incorporated both housing, residential opportunities, retail, commercial, restaurant space, something to make our downtown the lively urban place that we want it to be. We still want to, the nostalgia of the railroad tracks is fantastic. I've heard a lot of developers talk about that recently, even on the East Bank area. We just had one property owner within the downtown that purchased additional property on that East 8th Street area, but with the understanding and concept in the future that Phase 2 and Phase 3 project would be completed and he would be able to move forward with some of the redevelopment opportunities that he's taking into consideration as well. But one of the comments that he made, though, when he talked to me about that was that he really liked the nostalgia, the idea of keeping one or two of those rail lines, because we talked about that as well. Because of the type of use that he's looking at putting into his building, he was a little bit concerned about some of those whistles blowing through downtown and waking up potential tenants in the future. But one of the things that he said was that he also gets the impression that people also understand that when they move downtown that they expect that to some degree, and he kind of likes that nostalgia of keeping those 1 to 2 lines for future tenants as well, but with the understanding that the majority of the property would be able to be redeveloped, and it would buffer to some degree some of those uses that are more urban-like and more destination-oriented within our downtown.
If I might, Madam Chair, 2 comments on that. One, we know publicly the amount of economic development that we have lost already downtown because of the rail lines. $115 million worth of an event center did not go downtown because of the rail lines. And I realize there's more to it than that, but that's a huge piece of that. And we have to understand that we're losing business because of this. The other piece of it then, and you kind of alluded to that, is one of the main questions or calls that I get as a council member is about the train whistle, which is nothing, I can't do anything for you, I'm sorry, citizens, I can't make the trains stop blowing their whistle. Tell me about, if we can make this change, can we make the whistles stop?
Well, that's probably a question more for these gentlemen in engineering, but I think that that's a valid point for us to consider in the future as well. And we've talked about that internally also, because we do hear that from the development community and others that own property along the railroad throughout the entire Sioux Falls community. And so we want to look at those options in the future and see what possibilities there are to decrease that frequency of the whistle.
2 a.m., 4 a.m., 6 a.m. I mean, if you're awake at all, if you're not sleeping deeply, you're really awake. And it's not just the Central District. It's, you know, pieces of Northeast, pieces of Northwest, pieces of Southeast are hearing that all the time.
It's a very valid concern. When we had the representative from the Hilton Garden in recently to talk with the developers in the city in terms of relocating to the East Bank where the river ramp sits, that was one of the concerns that they expressed specifically. We have a letter from them stating so that is a concern for them and their hotel in the future in terms of redevelopment in that area.
Thanks. Then if I might add one question for Mark or Mike, one of the two. My question is, and we've asked this before, but there are new people listening at this point. Why does the city, why does the federal government have to do this? Why doesn't the railroad do this project on its own?
I think when we go back to 2002, when we sat down with BN to look at moving them, we asked them to move. They didn't come to us, and so we've taken it from that point as we've started the conversation and started to execute Phase 1, which is now complete, and some key projects in Phase 4 are complete. And now, if we can get a finding of no significant impact on Phase 2 and 3, we can move forward on those as well. Madam Chair, if I could, just to build on a comment, and we don't normally get them in our audience, so I would like to recognize them. We have, in the last 6 to 8 months, had a very good working relationship and a solid steering team that's evaluating the alternatives, having the hard discussions about the pros and cons. Marion Barber is here in the front row. She's with Federal Highway Administration, if I could recognize Marion. And right behind her is Michael Beam. He's with the Department of Transportation, and he plays a key role with the Department of Transportation. Both of those agencies are key as we evaluate this process, use the NEPA guidelines, and ultimately make decisions. Thank you.
Thank you. Councilor Anderson.
Thank you. So let's start with you, Mark. We start at the beginning of your slide presentation. You showed the intersections of, I believe, like 69th, 57th, where we built the overpasses.
Yes.
And the one at Pasley Park.
Yes.
Okay. That was all part of like Phase 4, I believe. Am I correct there?
Yes.
Okay.
Let's get to that slide first so we can show it. This is Phase 4, which is 57th Street.
What monies were used to pay for these projects?
The 57th Street project, that was a combination of using, and based on our population, we have get an annual SDP allocation from the DOT, which is State Transportation Improvement dollars. Now, with the new census, we have about $5 million a year to direct to what we call federal aid routes or mile grid routes, like 57th, 69th Street, and such. And so we used a combination of that funding to help construct the 57th Street project. The 69th Street project was primarily funded with sales tax. So the key of those two, that's how we normally execute the roadway improvements on our mile grids.
So no railroad relocation money were used for these projects?
That's exactly right. The only Congress authorized the $40 million for Phase 2 and Phase 3 specifically, and that was done with the work of Senator Tim Johnson and Senator John Thune. Both of them have also been key partners. They've helped keep us abreast over the years and certainly recently with the direction of the new proposed highway bill, and we couldn't thank them enough as well for all the work that they've done over time, initially to get the funding and to keep us current through the process.
Okay, and that just brings me right back down into the actual relocation fund. In the presentation, it was stated that if we could not get one of the plans acceptable to Burlington Northern, that we would do nothing. In that case, there is a possibility that we could lose that federal funding. Am I correct?
Well,
if we get to nothing.
Yeah, essentially to execute or to use federal dollars, you have to write an environmental assessment and you have to get it approved by the Federal Highway Administration. And it has to come through the NEPA guidelines, as we talked. One of those alternatives is always no build, because today there's a functioning rail system, and so you have to then look at, okay, what are the other potential projects that could come out of this. So,
okay. I guess where I'm still going with this too, Mark, is that if we get to a point of no build and we're saying that there's no other options, I guess I just wanted to explain to the public that basically the way that this money was allocated was just specifically for that downtown relocation, and that we can't use the money anywhere else.
it will only go to the railroad relocation. It's
Right.
specifically authorized by Congress by law for
Correct.
this project.
And that's what I wanted to bring out, is that,
Right.
you know, if there is no Plan B because there's no option given to us by the federal government.
That's right.
Okay, thank you.
I'm going to take my questions first because all of you have had a chance, and then I'll go back to you. But, Mark, as you're aware, I've been very interested in the process itself, going back to when the money was granted by the feds. And I am interested because I get asked a lot about the role that the council will play in these final decisions, and I understand if additional money is needed for the project that you will have to come to the council for some of those dollars. But can you tell me if, going back, whether the council had any role in the initial process as far as going after either approving Phase 2 or 3, or what role did they play?
I can certainly speculate that when the grant was authorized, we at least have to have the authority to move forward. And so, based on the work that we do with the capital plan and the state's transportation improvement plan, those two plans have to be in sync to spend the dollars. And so, in the past, we've had the railroad relocation plan in the capital improvement plan, so that it then can be recognized on the state side. And so there has been, at least from a budgetary authority, involvement on the council.
So initially, what you were looking for, that being able to turn the trains, was the additional bridge over the falls. Is that correct?
That's correct.
And then, is it true that it's just been within the last year or so that the south siding alternate came into play?
It has, and one of the reasons, and I compliment Marion, is that with her involvement in the project, she's given us some of the most direct feedback that we've had, and knowing some of the challenges that were going to be presented to us with affecting park property to that extent, we needed to look for another alternative that could still maintain rail operations.
You know, I guess that I'm very interested in you saying, you know, that there is a large concern about affecting park property. However, the south siding really does impact residential areas. Why isn't there the same concern? And I guess that also, why aren't we looking at more industrial areas or taking it further south into a rural area?
Well, I think one of the keys with the south siding is there's really two. There's one that pins it north at 57th Street and then traverses south. Do you have that? Let's just advance to those slides real quick. Because there really is, there's two sidings south. One is very rural, and the other is certainly more in the between 57th Street. Okay, so this is alternative A, and this is where the siding would start at 57th Street and then traverse south. This one has challenges because it is next to a residential area, but it's also next to a proposed park and affects a wetland in the area. So in our discussions on the project team, we know as you weight this one with the next one, alternative B, and this is where the north end of the siding, and again, these are not rail yards, these are just sidings where you essentially pull a train in so you can move the power around and pull it out. This is essentially nearly all rural. There is a rural subdivision that's down there at the south and east corner of 85th Street. So there's two start points, and this one is the most rural.
So is that part of, is that incorporated into the city, that land right now?
That land right now, I'm sure the annexation, no, the majority of that is not.
And does the railroad already own the land? I mean, I know, so that
The railroad
would be,
would likely own the majority of the land already for the siding.
so then there would be no dollars necessary from the city in order to purchase any land with.
Yeah, and again, we haven't drilled down to that far. We're still at the concept level, but I would, typically railroads have a prescribed amount of right-of-way, and I don't know, Mike, have you looked at that closer?
There's sufficient right-of-way that the railroad owns that the improvements could be constructed within that right-of-way without purchase of any additional.
And this is all rural. You're saying that all of this, there are no residential developments in alternate B?
No, let's use, this one starts at 69th Street, and that is Sioux Falls Christian School. Okay? And that's the overpass. And then as it traverses south, there is no city development south of that point. Now, right there where the cursor is, that's a rural subdivision that exists today. And that was that picture that Mike had showed, that if there are environmental impacts of noise, that some of those aspects can be mitigated with either a wall or something of that nature.
Councillor Entenmann.
I just have a couple more questions dealing a little bit with the land and the acquisition. And it was mentioned that the Ellison Eastern has a first right of refusal. Have you been in discussions with these folks about this property and this project?
We have. We've had several meetings, and again, one of the key aspects of this project is to not only satisfy the city but also satisfy the regulatory agencies. Is we have to write an environmental assessment, but we also have to have a joint memorandum of understanding that's executed between Ellison Eastern, Burlington Northern, as well as the City of Sioux Falls, that coordinates how this purchase and transfer would occur.
One or two more questions, if I might. With all of this, looking at this relocation of most of the rail track, there will still continue to be one or two tracks that will go through Sioux Falls. Is that not correct?
That's correct. That is correct.
So we're not going to be eliminating all the rail traffic through the center of our town, and there's still going to be issues with people having to stop for train crossings and all of those things.
Well, and I think, too, I just hope everyone takes away that we have to, as we grow as a community, we have to recognize how important rail is to us and how many customers that Burlington Northern, the DNI, and Ellison Eastern have locally that move products from those locations all across the country. And so good, efficient rail service is key, and we have to, again, face and address these items.
Then I'm also under the assumption that we're going through the environmental phase of the study. We haven't started doing anything with design on what anything would look like because there's been no decision made. So that's the same way with property acquisition for any of these suggestions that are out there or proposals. We haven't started any property acquisition discussions with any of the owners. Is that correct?
On some of the most impacted properties, we have sat down to show them before some of the alternatives. For example, Excel Energy owns the majority of the land that is north of Rice Street and west of Timberline. We did sit down with them again last week. There's a gentleman that owns a house right on Timberline. We've sat down with him because one of the challenges and the reasons we looked at the original E&E site was because we had to find a way to not close Timberline Avenue. Well, now a proposed alternative essentially goes right through that property. And so we wanted to sit down with that property owner. He has been engaged through the entire study. And then outside of that, that's really been the extent.
Okay, great, thank you.
Councilor Jameson.
Mark, I know you've got to get going, but just a couple of questions if I could. So far, the city did the 57th and 69th Street overpasses as well as the Paisley Park Bridge. So in essence, the city's already in this deal.
And the city built the sidings to the north near the airport, which allowed for the removal of the core line in the Milwaukee Yard, the extension of Falls Park West, and the build of North Phillips Avenue.
Do you have any way of quantifying that amount?
We certainly can get that for you.
Roughly, would you guess 15 million, 20 million?
Oh, it's more than that.
Okay, so substantial dollars have already been spent on this project. I think it's imperative we get this thing through. And if I could just talk to our other partner in this project, the Burlington Northern people. You say somebody's here?
Yes, Surratt is here. Surratt, you want to come forward? Surratt is from Fort Worth, and he's also been a key part of the project steering committee. Surratt?
Surratt, welcome to Sioux Falls. I'm sure our temperature is a little different than Fort Worth.
It's very cold.
I understand that you are in business to make money. The city is a nonprofit organization. We're coming together to try to make this deal work. We have a tremendous amount of benefit to occur to our city if this railroad switching yard gets moved out of downtown. Mm-hmm. What do you benefit? How do you benefit in this whole deal?
Well, in general, we want to be good corporate citizens.
Okay.
And so that's why we're working as best as we can with the city and find a good alternative. As far as the proposed yards, we're operationally neutral on all of them. They don't really benefit us, but they don't hurt. That's the key part of it. So as we've discussed, any solution that you propose, as long as it doesn't hurt our operations, we're more than happy to accommodate you.
Well, we would sure love to have all your participation in this as fully as possible. The switching yard downtown has probably got to be a little inconvenient for you, as it is inconvenient for us.
Right.
So I think this new switching yard would probably give you a more efficient operation, wouldn't it?
The current location is constrained, so we can't expand there, and it has fairly short tracks. But the consideration also is how far outside of town can we move it before it's no longer efficient. So basically, the yards that are proposed are pretty much on the outside out limit, where it adds another hour or two to our work times.
That's what I wanted to know. Thank you.
Councilor Erpenbach.
Thank you. Director Cotter, question about something you kind of hinted at earlier, and it was kind of a new bit of information for us, is that other option that might be closer to downtown. Can you talk about that a little more detail and maybe tell us when we might hear more about this? Because I feel like we're spinning our wheels. We keep saying, yeah, this is a great idea, but there might be something else that's just a little bit better. We've done that over and over and over again many times now.
Right.
Where are we at with that?
Well, it's in the very beginning stages, but I think one of the items, is there a map that you can take me to? One of the key aspects that we have to recognize, but we've also gained by working with Burlington Northern of recent, is that today this movement happens with a Madison train that comes into our city that then goes out to Corson, whether it goes off to into Minnesota area. And so one of the items that we looked at was, again, trying to keep in mind Burlington Northern's operational needs, is that how could that movement be made and not negatively impact their operations. So Josh, could you just start on the Madison sub? And as a train would move down through right as it gets to that point, and then pull through probably down to about River Boulevard. And again, it's just, it's in concept. Today, there's a double track for the majority of that current switch, and then it would allow for the power to move around and hook onto the train and move out. Some of the aspects of that plan could include putting up, because it would block, as it does today, Cliff Avenue. Because as we looked at those future overpasses, as we look down the road 10 years or so, 12th Cliff Avenue, just south of 12th Street, really does need to go over the rail. And from my perspective, we'd like to get more life out of the bridge that today goes over the river before you'd reconstruct not only over the river but over. And so we can also leverage some IT technology that, just like you see on some of the major interstates, that communicates to people that the railroad ahead is occupied, find alternate routes, so people know when they approach to immediately find alternate routes 2 and 3 blocks ahead of that crossing, as opposed to getting up there wondering if it's going to be a 5-minute time constraint, a 20-minute time constraint, or potentially an hour. And so very soon we'll know more. Okay.
Okay, don't keep us hanging.
I won't. It's actually a very new, recent idea that, again, it has not been tested with Burlington Northern, and so we just like to be as open as possible. I personally don't foresee any additional ideas coming out from our project team. We'll see what we hear from the residents tonight, and then I think at that point, just like Mike said, our goal is to submit the environmental assessment June, so we can start the process with the report.
Thank you.
Councilor Anderson.
Mark, a little earlier, Councilor from Bach asked about the horns that the trains sound off. Since we have someone here from Burlington Northern, or maybe you can explain when and why they do sound off those horns.
I will turn that over to Mike. I would also like them to just touch, if they can, that quiet zones across the country are getting to be very popular, and those are things that we can also consider going forward through our city.
Well, from a liability standpoint, they're required by law to blow a horn before they approach a at-grade crossing to alert people that they're coming, and so in the event that there is an accident or something, they've done everything they can to make sure that that doesn't happen. I do think that Sioux Falls would be a candidate for a quiet zone, and maybe you've heard about those, but what that is a project that would go through and look at all of the crossings and make it physically impossible, nothing's impossible, but very, very difficult to cross the tracks when a train was coming, where you put the arms on all 4 quadrants of the intersection, you extend a median so that you can't drive around to get across, various things that you can do, or simply just close the crossing. And you're going in that direction pretty quickly with the overpasses that you've already constructed, and that would continue. So the first step would be to look at all the crossings. The next step would be, how do we make it physically very difficult to cross? And once you get those crossings to a certain point, then the Burlington Northern would sign an agreement that would allow, there's some legal paperwork that's done that would allow them to pass through town without blowing their horn. The city of Fargo, North Dakota, has just gone through a process like that with quiet zones, and other places have around the country as well. They're pretty popular, I guess.
So that would basically, what we would be looking at would be the northbound traffic, and we'd be talking like 41st, 26th, 18th, and then 12th Street there before you get to the switching area.
Right. But what we've tried to do is make that apart and separate from the environmental assessment, so that doesn't get that hung up with that question, because that can be done separately.
Yeah. Thank you.
Any closing remarks, Mark?
No, just yes, thank you for your time. That was great questions, and hopefully you can join us at the Orpheum at 6 o'clock. Thank you.
Thank you. If there's no other business to come before this body, this meeting is adjourned.